Genshin Impact is not a game. Well, at least not according to the traditional definition of a game. I first discovered Genshin Impact back in 2020 on the Google Play Store. The art, the world, the music, everything about it instantly drew me in. When it finally launched, the experience felt genuinely magical. From open world exploration to the story and co-op, it was unlike anything I had played before. But as time went on, I started noticing something strange. Even though my grades were fine at the time, Genshin quietly began reshaping my habits, my spending, and even how I thought about games. Looking back now, it's clear how deeply these systems influenced me, often without me even noticing. This video is not a hate piece, but an analysis of Genshin Impact's design philosophy, why it feels so compelling, and why it doesn't function like traditional games at all. Using my personal experience as a starting point, we'll examine the psychological systems behind story pacing, time gating, gacha mechanics, monetization, and what that ultimately means for players today. Let's start with the story. Storytelling is inherently subjective, as different players perceive narratives differently based on their experiences. When I first explored Mondstadt and Liyue, I found the stories engaging, though part of that enjoyment may have been shaped by my limited exposure to other games and narratives. Even by today's standards, these early regions still deliver a reasonably strong story experience. However, with the Inazuma arc, the pacing noticeably deteriorated. While I didn't quit, I often felt bored or fatigued by the extended dialogue sequences. This reveals a broader design trend in Hoyoverse games, which is time spent in-game is prioritized over player enjoyment. This is evident in the lack of skip buttons for long dialogue sequences in the main story. Similar issues exist in the newer regions, like Sumeru and Natlan. Even when the story itself is strong like Fontaine and Nutcry arc, the pacing can be severely disrupted. For example, the Fortress of Meropide section requires players to complete repetitive minigames and chores to earn the currency necessary to progress, and the dialogue sequences remain unnecessarily bloated. While I cannot fairly critique Mondstadt or Liyue without the influence of nostalgia, the Inazuma arc and subsequent regions demonstrate a clear pattern. Playtime is artificially extended. This artificially extended playtime benefits the developers by boosting analytics, encouraging discussion, and deepening players' emotional attachments. In the version 6.2 Archon quest, there is a segment where Columbina hangs out with Aether. Setting the nonsensical plots aside, they simply didn't bother animating the scenes where any of them actually eats. What is supposed to be a critical emotional moment of bonding becomes a completely soulless sequence with cliché lines. This just shows how the developers lack creativity and are simply lazy. The lack of skip buttons affects more than just the main story. It also inflates side content. A prime example is the Aranara questline. It is entirely unskippable and can take over 11 hours to complete. Version 6.2 introduced a story quest split into 5 chapters, each unlocking on consecutive real-world days. Players are therefore forced to wait 5 full days to complete a single questline, which is an extreme form of time gating with no narrative or gameplay benefit. Genshin Impact features companion-centered quests, but the biggest problem lies in the Hangouts quests. In theory, Hangouts allow players to interact with characters through branching dialogue choices. Each choice affects a heart meter and leads to different endings. In practice, completing all endings for full rewards takes excessive time and yields little beyond a few collectible pictures. Without skip options, players are forced to endure slow, repetitive dialogue, even if they are uninterested in the character involved. However, the main issue is that none of it matters. Even if the Hangout features a character you like, the bonding is disconnected from the actual world and story. Characters do not acknowledge events afterward. Nothing in the narrative changes, and the player-character relationship is completely unaffected. It functions as a self-contained illusion of emotional connection, rather than genuine character development. Companion quests simply expand on individual characters, and while their quality varies, that's largely subjective, which is why I will not focus on them in this video. According to the dictionary, a game is an activity someone engages in for entertainment or amusement. This simple definition reveals something crucial. A game should be engaging because you want to play it, not because you feel obligated to log in, complete chores, or manage time-limited content. The distinction matters because much of Hoyoverse's design doesn't function as freely chosen entertainment. It functions as a structured routine, maintained to avoid missing rewards, falling behind, or losing progress. Essentially, the gameplay becomes less about play and more about compliance. And with that in mind, let us examine the progression system. In Genshin Impact, characters can be leveled up to 90 through multiple ascension stages. Weapons follow a similar progression system. Players must spend resin to clear world bosses or weapon ascension domains to obtain required materials. As you ascend characters, players are required to upgrade talents. At talents level 8, 9, and 10, weekly boss materials are required, but rewards can only be claimed once per boss each week. Maxing out a character's talents from scratch requires a minimum of 6 weeks. This slow drip progression is intentionally designed to keep players logging in. Each domain drops 3 types of materials, but each is only available on specific days, and drop rates are exceptionally low. This system induces a persistent fear of missing out. Players are encouraged to stockpile condensed resin, but with a cap of 5, it's insufficient. Many, including myself, feel pressured to purchase resin refreshers just to make meaningful progress. Endgame progression pushes this further through artifact farming. Artifacts are the biggest source of power, yet their stats are entirely randomized. After tens of hours of grinding, I still have never obtained a single Pyro or Dendro goblet with moderate crit value. This randomness fosters anxiety, frustration, and burnout. With occasional wins keeping players hooked, many players, myself included, feel compelled to purchase resin refreshes, only to face disappointment again. Genshin's artifacts dropbox system adds another layer. Trading 3 unwanted artifacts yields 1 from a selected set, but the newest sets are always excluded. This makes the system feel more like a consolation than a reward. However, there is something subtle. The strong box also serves a psychological function. It is a kind of small, unpredictable reward that feels meaningful, encouraging players to continue farming. Along with version 5.0, items like Sanctifying Elixir and Dust of Enlightenment were introduced. Although small amounts can be earned through exploration, most are only obtainable in Stygian Onslaught at the Menacing and Fearless difficulties. While the Menacing difficulty is achievable for most players, the Fearless difficulty requires new strong 5-star characters, which is effectively unattainable for low spenders or free-to-play players. In other words, the game sells partial solutions to problems it creates. Even these paid shortcuts are randomized, making progression inefficient by design. Monetization will be explored in depth later, but it already reveals a pattern. Genshin manufactures deliberate friction, then sells partial relief from it. With progression systems covered, let's move on to another major issue: map design. Genshin Impact's world is undeniably beautiful, but many design choices appear structured to keep players in a given area for as long as possible. Overworld puzzles such as lighting elemental torches, chasing series, or manipulating multi-step mechanisms may vary in enjoyment, but they all share one goal: extending the time players spend traversing in a single area. This is even clearer in newer regions. The Sumeru Forest, for instance, is packed with huge elevations between layers, isolated platforms, and dense underground areas, forcing constant climbing, gliding, and retracting just to access rewards or hidden mechanisms. Fontaine's Fortress of Mirror Feet exaggerates this. Vertical travel relies almost entirely on elevators, requiring repeated calls, waiting, rides, and pauses to ascend each floor. This design trend isn't new. Regions like Huaguang Stone Forest, Xingshi Pool, and Lingji Pass are disliked not for puzzle complexity, but because navigating cliffs and scattered structures demands relentless climbing and gliding. When players become overwhelmed by layered terrain or confusing underground routes, most turn to guides, yet using a guide undermines exploration entirely as curiosity becomes compliance. Next, let's consider Genshin Impact's events design. Like most live service games, Genshin releases major and minor events with every update. Events are packed with rewards that strongly incentivize participation. However, the majority are repackaged minigames. They are simple, disconnected activities primarily padding the patch runtime. Almost all events are time-gated as well. This trend dates back to version 1.1's A Reconciled Stars event, where players could earn rewards only through spending resin. This structure slowed normal progression while restricting players through the daily resin timer. Developer backlash led to the resin requirements being removed, revealing an important pattern. Genshin's event structure prioritizes retention and engagement metrics over player enjoyment. A deeper problem is how detached events feel from the world. Most minigames seem designed first and justified later, awkwardly inserted through NPCs. Examples include food delivery quests where players sprint to reach a destination for rewards, marvelous merchandise involving simple logins and NPC interactions, and Bing Bang Finchball, which is fun for some players, but it still suffers from extreme time gating. The structure is always the same. Only a small fragment of the event is playable per day, forcing daily logins for rewards, which are primarily Primo Gems, the currency players value the most. Now let us move to the core, the Gacha system and the resource acquisition loop. Genshin is a Gacha game, and the entire structure funnels players towards that system. In earlier versions, weapon banners had no hard pity mechanism. Players could pull indefinitely without obtaining the desired weapon. The streamer Tectone famously pulled 8 Wolf's Gravestones and various off-banner weapons before finally getting the Staff of Homer. He mentioned he had spent nearly $2,000 for a single copy. The epitomized path mechanic was later introduced. The third 5-star weapon a player receives is guaranteed to be their chosen one. However, this guarantee does not carry across banners, effectively locking out non-spenders and inducing FOMO for spenders. as hitting hard pity 3 times cost roughly $450. The epitomized path mechanic was further reworked not long ago to reduce the number of 5-star weapons you need before the guarantee to 2 instead of 3. Character banners have similar issues. In the worst case, a single 5-star character can cost over $330. The problem isn't just the existence of a gacha, it is the entire game funnels players towards spending. A significant part of this system is friction by design. Genshin deliberately creates obstacles, then offers partial solutions through limited characters. Sumeru's dense, vertical forest is notoriously slow to navigate, yet soon after, the character Wanderer was released, capable of flying through the forest. Flatlands exploration is frustrating and time-consuming as well. For example, at the ancient Sacred Mountain, Chaska allows players to reach other islands easily. Without her, navigating the lower levels with confusing layouts and mechanisms takes significantly longer. Every Netland character includes some form of exploration quality of life, often with small mechanics that feel smooth but are locked behind expensive paywalls. This trend goes back to launch with characters like Venti, who can elevate himself with his elemental skill, and Yalan, who trivializes travel with her sprint. Meanwhile, power balance issues arose after the introduction of Hyperbeam in Sumeru. Enemy HP drastically increased, and some even forced specific reactions. Let's take a look at the creativity of our developers with these 2 bosses as examples. Banner scheduling adds even more pressure. For instance, Malvoika and Sitlali, one of the strongest duos, have their banners running at the same time, while 3 pulls were delayed until after both banners ended. Certain characters have design flaws corrected only after paid constellations. As power creep grows and synergistic kits remain locked behind limited characters, old units quickly fall behind, even with paid constellations eventually becoming irrelevant. The same trend continues in newer regions. Version 6.0's Nightcry introduced lunar reactions locked to limited 5-star characters. Some enemies require depleting HP and filling secondary bars, which requires Ascendant Gleam to bypass, and that requires 2 Nightcry characters to avoid slow and repetitive combat experience. Progression shortcuts have become largely pay-gated, such as Sanctifying Elixir and Dust of Enlightenment, obtainable only through the menacing and fearless Stygian Onslaught difficulties. On top of that, the dire difficulty exists as well bait, as they give out very well-designed weapon skins as rewards, but those skins aren't even permanent. To obtain the premium weapon skins, players are required to clear the dire difficulty within 3 minutes, which means players are essentially required to have max constellations of the powerful featured units. Not to mention, the option of having characters reach level 100 requires 10 character copies, which translates to roughly $3,000. Millie Astral Wonderland adds another monetized layer, with outfits locked behind Chrono Nexus, which can only be obtained through real-world currency. Free tokens are merely discounts, not actual pulls. Outfits cost roughly $120 each. Alternate color palettes require duplicates, doubling the price. Version 6.2 continues the trend. Story quests are spread across 5 days of forced time gates, and Hexen Circle quests force players to own and level certain characters. Lore-focused players are effectively forced to pull for characters they may not want, as Primogems remain scarce. Even seemingly minor Hexorite buffs are concerning. Given Hoyoverse's history, future limited characters with interdependent buffs may accelerate power creep and enemy HP inflation. All of this is layered with emotional manipulation. By maximizing player time investment, Genshin increases attachment to characters and the world, making players more likely to continue pulling despite fatigue. Teasers for characters like Columbina, Farka or Alice maintain long-term engagement, keeping fans invested for years. The grind reinforces the pressure from daily tasks and HP-inflated endgame, while new attractive characters draw players back, even when they are not enjoying themselves. Exploration becomes part of the monetization loop. Treasure chests and achievements yield tiny Primogen rewards, mainly 2 to 5 at a time. During banner periods, players often fall for the illusion of abundance, scouring the map for small rewards. Because new characters often include exploration quality of life upgrades, the game subtly encourages players to wish for them just to make traversal less painful. Taken together, these systems create a cycle of friction. fear of missing out, and temptation. Traversal, combat, exploration, everything funnels back to monetization. Players are treated less as people enjoying a world and more as resources to be extracted. This intentional slowdown extends to combat as well. Many bosses are built around stalling mechanics, forcing specific mechanics or wasting time rather than offering engaging combat. It's not only major bosses. The same pattern can be observed in numerous overworld enemies. The worst part about this is that stalling mechanics can be found in certain enemies at the beginning of the game, such as the Animal Hypostasis, the Eye of the Storm, and Abyss Mages. Across these encounters, the challenge rarely comes from learning mechanics or responding to meaningful attacks. Instead, stall mechanics artificially prolong fights, resulting in combat that is exhausting, repetitive, and unenjoyable. Time wasting extends beyond combat. Basic quality of life features are often absent. What appears as oversight is often another method to extend playtime and reinforce fear of missing out. Exploration stamina is tiny, which slows traversal. Layered maps compound this, making exploration feel like a chore. Daily commissions must still be claimed manually from Catherine. Even if Catherine is near a waypoint in Nightcry, teleporting and walking adds nothing meaningful. A trivial task is artificially prolonged to earn those 60 Primogems. Boss farming is similarly slow as arenas must often be reached from the nearest waypoint. Exploration tools like the Treasure Compass have tiny ranges and long cooldowns. Rather than aiding exploration, it prolongs it and frustrates players, reinforcing engagement metrics over enjoyment. Artifact loadouts, a highly requested feature, still does not exist 5 years in. Updates focus on quality of life for new players, signaling that veterans are treated as long-term retention statistics rather than actual players. Now, looking at every major system, storytelling is bloated and unskippable, hangouts feel shallow, and progression suffers from time gating, fear of missing out, low drop rates, and scheduling pressures. Map design is convoluted and slow, often nudging players towards limited characters. Events are repackaged minigames stretched across days. Gacha leverages hope and scarcity. Character releases monetize emotional attachment. Enemy design stalls players artificially, and quality of life features remain delayed for veterans, all to maintain engagement. None of this truly qualifies as a game in the traditional sense. It is retention funnels, engagement loops, and monetization pipelines. It's clear, Genshin Impact isn't designed to be a game, it's designed to look like one. If this analysis gave you something to think about, feel free to share your ideas and perspectives in the comments. Thanks for watching.